Hello and welcome to the True Crime Lounge. Today we're going to be talking about the top case, the most famous cases from your state. That's right. We're going to be talking about one case from your state. This will be a two-parter, possibly three-parter. It depends on how far I get. But we will start with. But before I continue, I want you to hit that like button, comment, and subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. All right, we're going to take a short break and we'll get started. Alright, next on our list we have Maine. And this is the murder of Mary Catherine Olenchuk in Ogunquit. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If not, I apologize. And that is it took place in 1970. And is currently the oldest cold case in the state of Maine. This case happened with 13-year-old Mary Catherine Olenchuk. Witnesses say that they saw her standing next to a maroon car driven by a man in his 30s. On August 9, 1970, she was found dead August 22nd in a barn in Kennebunk with a rope around her neck. This case is over 50 years old and it still remains cold. Next on our list we have Maryland. I actually know someone from Maryland who moved down south to marry Southern Belle. I'm kidding, I think he moved down south before he married her. But in Maryland, this is the murder of Kaylin Wallace. Guys, I apologize in advance. Wallace-Lukey, also known as Carolyn Wells, made headlines around the word Carolyn, just so I don't have to keep butchering her last name up. Was 14 and was the oldest of 7 children. Her bloody remains were discovered in a Baltimore rail yard in 1954, with the name Paul written through her thigh in lipstick, according to Baltimore Sun. This case also inspired the movie Crybaby, and it starred none other than Johnny Depp. Alright, next on our list we have Massachusetts. Okay. What usually comes to your mind when you hear Massachusetts? A lot of things, right? Baseball, the Boston Tea Party. Well, this case happened in Fall River in 1892. And if you're saying Lizzie Borden, you are correct. And this is where she was accused of murdering her parents with an axe in 1892 and remained a pariah in Fall River even though she was acquitted. She allegedly took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw she had done, she allegedly gave her 541. That might not be how the original rhyme goes, but it was more accurate since Lizzie was acquitted of her parents' murder in 1893. On August 4th, 1892, Andrew Jackson Borden and his wife Abby were plunged to death with an axe into New England today. Axe. Police could find no evidence of who committed the crime, but arrested the daughter Lizzie and charged her with murder. Because the evidence was purely circumstantial, and because she was a woman as well, we're going to add that part in, she was acquitted after a jury deliberated for less than an hour. Keep in mind, this jury was men. But the townsfolk of Fall River never stopped believing that she was guilty and ostracizing her for the rest of her life. The Lizzie Borden house where her parents were found murdered is now a popular tourist destination, and it was featured in an episode of Supernatural. Next on our list, we have the state of Michigan. I have an aunt who's from Michigan. But this is the Oakland Child County Killer who murdered 4 children between 1976 and 1977. Also known as the babysitter killer, whose identity is still unknown. The killer is believed abducted in some cases, sexually assaulted and killed children between 1976 and 77. The killer would then clean the kids' clothes, arrange the bodies, and a sort of display in the streets of the Metro Detroit for investigators to find. This unsolved case is subject to a book called The Kill Jar by J. Reuben Appelman and a Hulu docuseries called Children of the Snow. I'm going to have to look that up now. Next on our list we have Minnesota with Mary Chalaus. I'm just going to say Mary for future reference, guys, because I am not butchering this name up. Was found dead in a Springbrook Township in 1974. It might have been the work of a serial killer. Mary was found in a Springbrook Township in 1974 where she was stabbed 15 times. A witness saw a man in a compact car throw her body in a ditch along the side of the road and helped police draw up a sketch. Police suspect that the death may have been the work of Randall Whitfield, former Green Bay Packer, who became known as the I-5 Killer, who was linked to 44 murders. Whitfield only ever confessed to one and is currently serving a 90-year prison sentence. This case is still cold. Mississippi. I recently have been through Mississippi here recently on my way to Houston. But, in Mississippi, Flint Lee was killed and thrown off a bridge in Simpson County in 2009. Lee disappeared in Simpson County in August 2009 and his body was found floating in a strong river, and his truck was riddled with bullet holes set on fire and pushed down a ravine. Investigators believe he was killed and then thrown off a bridge based on the trail of blood. 3 people were arrested, but insufficient evidence will lead to their release. The Simpson County Sheriff's Department considers it a cold case. Next we have on the list is Missouri with a horrible football team. So, no offense if you're from Missouri. It was a prepubescent girl was found decapitated in St. Louis in 1983 in a case that still haunts detectives. On February 28, 1983, a female body was missing and was found abandoned in a building in St. Louis. Police originally thought it was the body of a sex worker, but soon discovered it was the victim, much younger, to be between 8 and 11. At the time, it was the only decapitation in the U.S. that involved a person that young, according to the FBI. The victim and killer still remain unidentified. She is simply known as Little Jane Doe in the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database. Next we have Montana, a state where the show Yellowstone is set. I've only watched one episode so far, but I love watching the clips from Yellowstone. But the murder of Nelson Annie Anderson in 1924 is one of Billings' oldest unsolved cases, according to Billings Gazette. On December 7, 1924, Barbara Nels Anderson and his wife Annie were bludgeoned to death with an axe. They kept in their shop for chopping wood, leaving behind 4 children. There were no signs of struggle, and the couple still had money in their pockets. The murder remains unsolved. Next we have our end states, which will consist of Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota. Is there another one? I'm trying to think of offhand, but I can't really think right now. But in Nebraska, Children's State Professor Stephen Hotjaw, which for the rest of the video we will call him Stephen, was found tied to his tree and burned to death, but some think it could have been suicide. Children's math professor Stephen was found tied to a tree and burnt. He had attempted suicide before, leading some to believe he took his own life, but there is no evidence found at the crime scene. Dawes County Attorney Vance Hogg, and his death was an unresolved death case. A 2013 book and 2014 documentary called Love and Terror on the Howling Plains of Nowhere explored a case. In Nevada, if you don't know who this rapper is, you're too young. Um, this rapper is Tupac, and this happened in Las Vegas in 1996, 27 years ago, guys. I know. I make that face every time I think about that. But rapper Tupac Shakur was killed on September 7, 1996 at 25 years old. It's scary to think about. He was shot and stopped at a red light in Las Vegas. Gang rivalry suspected as a motive, but his death would spawn a host of conspiracy theories, including some of that believe he is still alive. A&E has a 6-hour miniseries called Who Killed Tupac? Next on our list, we have New Hampshire. And this is the Connecticut River Killer, who is responsible for at least 7 deaths between 1978 and 1987. So between 1978 and 1987, the Connecticut River Killer is said to have fatally stabbed 7 women in New Hampshire. His 8 victims survived. In 1988, Jane Borowski, who was 7 months pregnant, was approached at a convenience store parking lot by a man and proceeded to stab her 27 times. She managed to drive to a friend's house, and both she and the baby survived the attack. After the killing stopped, Borowski provided the police a description of a partial license plate, but was never identified. The Connecticut River Killer profiled on Unsolved Mysteries and THS Investigates. Next, we'll have some of the new states. Get it? New states. Okay, I'm done with the jokes. We have New Mexico, and this is. Well, I did New Jersey. Well, I didn't do New Jersey. Let me start with New Jersey real quick. New Jersey, with the Eastbound Strangler, serial killer suspected of killing 4 women in Atlantic City in 2006, remains at large. Kim Ruffo, Dolly Dilts, Barbara Breeder, and Tracy Roberts were found dead behind the Golden Key Motel in Atlantic City in 2006. They have all been strangled or asphyxiated. I think that's how you pronounce it. Sorry, guys, if I butchered it up. And were positioned face down, barefoot, with their head facing east. This crime scene was never found. The Unsolved Mystery was featured on A&E's The Killing Season. Next with our new states, we have New Mexico. And it took police a year to identify the remains of 11 women killed in West Mesa murders. I remember this episode of Dateline. But they still haven't identified the killer. When a woman walking her dog found a human bone in 2009, had no idea she had come across one of the biggest crime scenes in U.S. history. She found a 100-acre patch in the desert in Albuquerque's southwest Mesa, which contained the remains of 11 women. The 11 women buried all their connections to the drugs and had all their connections to drugs and prostitution, and it took a year to identify all the women that came up in a small pool of suspects. But no one was ever charged. Last of our new states, we have New York. Dun dun dun. If New York Empire State of Mind comes to your head, congrats. Or I'm using my Swiftie brain for a minute and saying welcome to New York or something like that. Anyway, in New York, the beloved owner of 2nd Avenue Deli was shot and killed in 1996. 27 years ago, guys. When the owner of legendary 2nd Avenue Deli on Lower East Side was killed in 1996 and shot, it shocked New York. Abe Labawal. I'm just gonna say Abe, just so I don't keep embarrassing myself trying to butcher a name up. Was known as the mayor of 2nd Avenue, feeding homeless people in high society and members alike at his restaurant. He had been in been on his way to a bank when he was shot and robbed of $10,000. The gun was recovered in Central Park 3 days later and police released a sketch of the suspect, but it's still unsolved, more than 20 years later. Next on our list is North Carolina and North Dakota, or North States, as I'm going to say. First of four North States is North Carolina. And this is a 72-year-old grandmother who was found with a knife in her throat and stash at Pinehurst home in 1989. Evelyn Williams was an active member of the community in a small town of Pinehurst, North Carolina, when she was shot with her throat slashed in the utility room outside her garage at night. The killer left no clues and detectives were baffled. With only a pocketbook missing, they ruled out robbery as a motive. It wasn't a random act, Farmer Jerry Lee Cooper told the News and Observer. You don't have such a violent death over just give me your pocketbook, lady. The News and Observer call it the Morris County coldest case. Interesting. Next on our list we have North Dakota. And this is where a serial killer who murdered six people in Niagara Falls is known. But the names of the victims are still a mystery 100 years later. Police believe to know the name of the serial killer who buried six bodies in the crawl space in the house in Niagara, North Dakota, Eugene Butler, who was committed in an insane asylum in 1906. But after 100 years, the identities of the victims remain unknown. The bodies have been only found after Butler's death. Inform calls it one of the state's biggest murder mysteries. Next, we have our O states. We have Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon. Yes, I actually named all three of them. In Ohio, we have the Cleveland torso murder from the 1930s and is still unknown. So basically, from 1935 to 1938, the Cleveland torso murder beheaded and frequently dismembered their victims. 7 men and 5 women in total. Some of the victims couldn't even be identified due to incomplete remains. The murders have subject to public fascination as well as both nonfiction and fiction books. I must look up the books that are based off this now. Next we have Oklahoma. Still the one question I have. Why does Oklahoma have a panhandle? I get that, no, they got stuck with it, but still, why do they have a panhandle? Alright, the Lawton serial killer struck from 1999 to 2003, killing 5 women. When corpses of young women began turning up in the creeks, steam beds in the Lawton area, police knew they had a serial killer on their hands. The women also have been involved with sex work, cocaine residue, and each of the women suggesting being the target of underground drug trade along the Catch Road in Lawton. Next we have Oregon, the state between California and Washington. I have no clue what happens there. I do have a lot of drawbridges. That's the only thing I can tell you. So, Oregon. 2 women who were attacked by a man with an axe while camping in Klein Falls in 1977. 1977, 19-year-old Terry Jens and her college roommate Shayna Wise spent the night at Klein Falls State Park while on a cross-country bike trip. They woke up in a truck over a tent. A man had gotten in, started attacking them with an axe. Jens was left with broken bones and Wise was left behind. In Klein Falls, 15 years later, to investigate the crime herself, but the attacker was never found. She wrote a book on her experience called Strange Piece of Paradise. Next, we have the PR in the South states. Get it? PR in the South. That. Okay, I'm done with jokes. Okay. So in Pennsylvania, an unidentified boy became known in 1957 became known as the boy in the box, and this has recently been solved. Yes, I remember this case. On February 26, 1957, the body of a small boy was found beaten and disposed in a box in Susquehanna Road in Philadelphia. Police estimated that the boy was between 5 and 6. 60 years later, his identity in the killer hasn't been discovered, which it has been now, thanks to 2022. Not sure when this article was found that I'm taking my information off of, but. Next we have Rhode Island with Joanne Lee Reynolds, who was found dead in her apartment in 1980. Investigators hoped to find the lead on Facebook. 24-year-old Joanne Lee Reynolds was been stabbed in her apartment February 16, 1980. There were no signs of forced entry, leading police to believe she knew her attacker. More than 30 years later, police are reopening an investigation. The North Kingston Police Department created a Facebook page in 2012 in an attempt to gather more information about the cold case. Now let's talk about our South states. If you know our South states, it's pretty easy. We have South Carolina with a terrible football team, but beautiful beaches, I will say that. With 4-year-old Jessica Guthrie's, who was kidnapped in Lexington County in 1986. Jessica, because I'm not butchering her last name, who was 4, was kidnapped in June 6, 1986 in the Red Bank area of Lexington County, South Carolina. The next morning, her mother was frantically searched at home with Jessica's sister Becky said that the man with the magic hat and the beard took her last night. Authorities took a fresh look at the case in 2021 and 2022. Thomas McDowell was arrested and charged with burglary, kidnapping, and murder. According to his arrest warrant, his fingerprints have been found at the scene, People magazine reported. The trial remains ongoing. So hopefully we should have an update on that one here soon. South Dakota. What do I know about South Dakota? It has one of the centermost points of the U.S., I think. But South Dakota, a mother and her 2 children were shot dead at Mount Vernon in 1981. The father, who was charged with first-degree murder but later acquitted, LaDonna Mathis, 30, and her 2 sons, aged 4 and 2, were shot dead September 8, 1981. And this occurred in Mount Vernon, Davidson County, South Dakota, with their father John Mathis, who was shot in the arm but survived. He is said a masked man had carried out the attack, but investigators consider him the prime suspect. He was acquitted years later when a jury found him not guilty. The then Attorney General Mark Mahaney said the trial was the most covered, watched, and listened to case in recent history of the state. Next, we have our T states, and then we're going to move on to our UV states. With our T states, we're going to start with Tennessee, one of my favorite states to always go to. And Texas, which I just recently went for the first time a few weekends ago, which I loved it. We went to Houston. But anyway, let's start with Tennessee. The redhead murders. Ginger Club here. The redhead murders of the redheaded women occurred in Tennessee as well as 4 other states over 3 decades. In the 1970s, 80s, and even the 90s, bodies of redheaded women were found in Memphis, Jellicoe, Ashland City, and Greenville, Tennessee, as well as Kentucky, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Pennsylvania. All the bodies were found along major highways, suggesting that they were hitchhiking or working prostitution, according to Gaston Times. They were dubbed the redhead murders, with local authorities from all 5 states enlisting help of the FBI to track down the killer. but they have continued to elude arrest. The exact number of victims are known, but it could be as many as 11 women. Texas. Now, I was just talking about Houston for this one. A young couple was found in a lover's lane in Houston. Cheryl Henry, 22, Andy Atkinson, 21, drove to a secluded patch in the woods in Houston dubbed Lover's Lane. On August 22nd, 1990, they never came back out. Atkinson was found tied to a tree with his throat slashed. Henry was found naked, buried in a stack of boards. She had been sexually assaulted and her throat cut. Police are using new DNA technology to confirm a potential suspect, but no one has ever been charged or convicted. This remains one of Houston's most infamous unsolved slayings. Next on our list, we have our UV states. Get it? Okay, I'm done with the puns. Okay, so starting off, our only U state in the country, Elizabeth Salgado, disappeared in 2015. Her remains were found in Hobble Creek Canyon 3 years later. Salgado went missing after leaving her school in Provo, Utah in 2015. In 2018, a man reported finding human remains in Hobble Creek Canyon. Dental records helped identify remains of Salgado. The case remains unsolved. According to Provo Police Chief Rich Ferguson said in a 2018 press conference, over the past 3 years, the case has been looked at so many times and we tried to find new answers for the Salgado family. The members of the Criminal Investigation Division at the Provo Police Department have dedicated thousands of hours and exhausted hundreds of leads, which include traveling to Mexico with the FBI with facts about her disappearance. This case has been featured on True Crime Podcasts as well as Unsolved Mysteries. Love that show. Alright, now our V states. So, we have Vermont and Virginia. We'll start off with Vermont. I'd love to go visit it one day. So between 1920 and 1950, many as 10 people disappeared in Bennington Triangle in southwestern Vermont. This is a patch of woods surrounding Glastonbury Mountain in southeastern Vermont, western Vermont, sorry. Some who had even reported UFO activity and Bigfoot sightings in the area. So, an author, Joseph Citro, have coined the term Bennington Triangle in 1992. In Virginia, we have the Colonial Parkway murders. I know this case because I looked into this case tirelessly. In 1992, in which remains remain unsolved after 30 years. So this happened between 1986 and 1989, when a series of murders along the Virginia Historic Colonial Parkway claimed the lives of 8 people in their teens and 20s. The FBI got involved, asking Russia to view satellite footage, but no one was ever arrested. And lastly on our list we have our 3W, 4W, Washington, Wisconsin, West Virginia, Wyoming. Yeah, 4. That was embarrassing. But we're going to start off with Washington. Murders in Mineral in 1985 became known as the Two Stocking Killings. In 1985, 2 couples disappeared in the wooded areas of Pierce and Lewis counties. Stephen Hawking and his girlfriend Ruth Cooper were found dead. The Mike Weimer disappeared while his girlfriend Diana Robinson was found dead. In both cases, the women had tube stocks tied around their necks. In 2011, Weimer was confirmed dead whenever parts of his skull was found near Mineral. And if you want to go watch Unsolved Mysteries, the Tube Stock Killings is featured on this. We're gonna highlight that real quick. Next on our list, we have West Virginia. Is anybody hear the song coming along, or is it just me? Okay. So in West Virginia, we have the Sauter family, whose house burned down in 1945 in Fayetteville. Sounded so country on that. 4 of the 9 children escaped, but the other 5 disappeared completely. A fire broke out in the Sutter home on Christmas Eve 1945. 4 of the 9 children escaped, but with a blaze was finally put out, firefighters found no trace of the other 5 children. So, Fire Chief J. Fire Chief F. J. Morris concluded that the fire had been hot enough to cremate the bodies. The death certificates were issued, but witnesses said they saw the children after the fire. 20 years later, the mother, Jenny, received a photo in the mail labeled Louis Sauter and the son, who was 9 years old in the fire. Did they die? Are the Sauter children still out there somewhere? No one knows exactly for sure. Next, we have Wisconsin. If you know anything about Wisconsin, you know they have cheese. I think that's the only thing I know. Wait, Wisconsin. Don't they have the Packers? I might be right on that one. Yay, yay. If not, boo. Oh, that's sad. But anyway, Wisconsin. 7 women affiliated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison died in the capital city killings between 1968 and 1982. Between 1968 and 1982, 7 women affiliated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison were killed by strangulation and stabbing. I'm not smiling, I promise. All the victims had long hair and lived in Madison, suggesting that the murders were the work of a serial killer or killers. But others in the police don't think that all the cases are connected. The murders became known as the capital city killings. The perpetrators have never been found. Next, we have Gabby's Bones, and this is not Gabby Petito, although that is a case that I do plan on talking about later on down the road. I'm just trying to I just gotta get through a lot more stuff to do before I can get to that video, okay guys? Alright, so Gabby's bones were found in an old trunk in the 1930s in Thermopolis. In 1986. I'm laughing at the name. A man identified only as Gabby left an old trunk in his friend Newell Sessions shed in Thermopolis. In 1986, while Sessions decided to open it years later, he found human bones. The remains date back to early 1900s, and the trunk's lock dated back to 1930s, ruling out Gabby as a suspect. When DNA testing technology came back as available, the bones were identified as Joseph Morvansey. Morvansey's daughter said her father was shot and killed by his brother, but the Hot Springs County Sheriff never confirmed this. The story behind Gabby's bones remains a mystery. That is it for this episode. Please check out the merch shop. Remember, it's all going for a good cause. Tell me what cases surprised you. If there's any updates on the case, please let me know in the comments. I know the boy in the box, I know that case has been solved. So, but just please let me know in general, guys. Don't forget to hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications.